right, Minnesota sports fans, welcome back to another edition of Bring Me the Sports on Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. It is officially transfer portal season in the college football world, and there is plenty of news for the Gophers. Today was early National Signing Day, so they welcomed in 20 new high school recruits, and there was some transfer portal news on that front throughout this week. Couple players have entered. PJ Fleck said the Gophers intend to add a player from the transfer portal, and now they're bringing in 20 high school recruits. So I thought be a perfect time to break it all down, what it means for the Gophers this offseason, what their roster could look like, and kind of just break down the entire strategy they could have for roster construction this offseason. So let's look at the Gophers roster here. All right, there we go. So the Gophers are. Let's look at the scholarship here. So, right off the bat, the Gophers, let's talk about early National Signing Day. They brought in 20 new high school recruits. And what's new this year is there is a hard cap of 150 scholarships. In the past, or not even 150 scholarships, excuse me, 105 players on your roster. In the past, there had been 85 scholarships available, and then after that, teams were able to add players from the transfer portal. So this year, it's capped at 105 total. No more than that, including your preferred walk-ons. You can have a max of 105 scholarship players, but you can't have any more preferred walk-ons. You can have 80 scholarship players and 25 preferred walk-ons, but it has to be 105 total. So that essentially means all the players that are not on scholarship count just as much to your roster limits as a player on scholarship would. So when looking at the Gophers roster here, the players that I included on this list for 2025-2026, the next season, is any player with available eligibility that did not participate in senior day. So Jalen Logan Redding, for example, said that he already plans to come back. A few other seniors here did not participate in senior day. So they could hypothetically exhaust their remaining eligibility. Devin Eastern, another guy that's likely going to come back, and everyone there. So when you look at the roster here, the Gophers have 3 available scholarships to work with in the transfer portal now. They added 20 players from the high school recruiting class, headlined by Jackson Colick, who is a 4-star quarterback from um, Laguna Beach, California, the number two ranked quarterback that PJ Fleck has ever added from the high school ranks, trailing only 8th in Cali Akmena. So a big time recruit at that position. The number 1 guy in the class is Emmanuel Carmo, a outside linebacker, defensive end type player from Robbinsdale Cooper High School. He's the number 1 ranked player in Minnesota. It's now 3 years in a row that Minnesota has the number 1 ranked player in the class after adding Jackson Howard from the transfer portal last offseason. They now have Howard, Coy Parrish, and Carmo. So really impressive in-state recruiting there. And overall, the Gophers class ranks 51st in the country. That is the 6th best class out of the 9 that PJ Fleck has signed since coming to Minnesota. So it is a bit of a drop off from last year's class. Last year's class was the best that Fleck had, headlined by Coy Parrish, Nathan Roy, Riley Sunram, Brett Carroll, Drake Lindsay. A lot of talented players from that class. This class is not as good. But what's interesting now in the college football world is what does that mean? So you didn't have a good high school recruiting class, but you can now make up for that in the transfer portal. It's just a different roster building strategy. In the past, you could only add players from the transfer portal, or at least predominantly. And now you have different avenues to add players. So while the Gophers objectively did take a step back in high school recruiting, that doesn't necessarily mean it will impact them immediately or even impact them in 4 years. They have opportunities to overcome this. I would assume they're aware that it was a down class, but that doesn't mean that their roster is going to take a massive hit. Right now, it looks like it might, but they have the next month in the transfer portal to make changes in that area. Before I get into what they can do in the transfer portal, some other players that I think are really impressive in this class that are underrated. Bradley Martino, wide receiver from Florida, really talented guy who can play both ways, but he will be a wide receiver with the Gophers. Might not contribute right away, kind of a long term guy, but he has really high potential. And some underrated guys, Naeem Parrish is a cornerback from Bergen Catholic High School in New Jersey. Might have the chance to contribute the most day one out of anyone in this class. He will enroll early. Really underrated guy. Jaquan Stubbs is a talented defensive lineman. Really reminds me of Devin Eastern. He could have a similar type of trajectory. And Abu Tarawali from Minnesota went to Providence Academy in Eden Prairie. Really talented defensive lineman. The Gophers have shown the ability to develop players like that under defensive line coach Winston Delatsbadair, and there's plenty of talent to do that again this year. There's a lot of interesting long-term prospects in this class, but I'm not sure there's going to be many contributors year one um, as true freshmen. If anywhere, it would be at the cornerback position because the Gophers are a little thin there. And once we get into the transfer portal a little bit, that's what I think they could attack here. But overall, there's a lot of high potential guys. But like I said, I can't envision too many of these guys contributing a whole lot in year one, which presents a unique strategy here when they attack the rest of the offseason when it comes to the transfer portal. So, overall, I think it's fair to be skeptical of this class for the Gophers. It's the sixth best out of 9 classes that PJ Flex had, which in year not in heading into year 9 now, is I don't know how much of a concern it should be, but it's definitely notable. So, um, it'll be worth monitoring as we enter the transfer portal part of the offseason now. So, I've talked enough about the transfer portal. Let's talk about who the Gophers have lost in that area. So, most notably today, they lost longtime um, running back Jordan Newman, veteran running back. He entered the transfer portal um, after 4 years with the program. Let me include him here. Sorry. So he entered after 4 years with the program. He becomes the fifth scholarship player to enter the transfer portal this year. And how that impacts the Gophers is interesting because, especially at the running back position, they've now lost two um, scholarship players. Syed Bangura, who was a transfer from Ohio last offseason, and now Jordan Newman. Two guys that could have competed for that backup role behind Darius Taylor. Craig McDonald, Hayden Schwartz, and Luther McCoy were kind of looking at reserve roles. And I mentioned how notable it is that preferred walk-ons enter the transfer portal now because they do contribute to that roster limit. So it's worth noting that Jordan Greenhow, D-back, Ryan Algram, long snapper, and Jack Hawkinson, defensive end, have also all entered. So that's 8 players in total. Jordan Newman and Bangor definitely had the path to contributing most this season, or I should say in 2025. But this is totally something that the Gophers can overcome now as they head into the offseason. So when you look at their roster, they have as many of as 102 players expected to be on the team next year. There are going to be a lot of these guys that enter the transfer portal. I don't know who exactly, but PJ Flex says the team plans to add 10 to 15 players from the portal. Right now, they can only add 3 based on this. So there's going to be a couple other people that we don't know yet that will be entering the portal. So that's going to be worth monitoring. But now looking to the depth chart, which is interesting too. So PJ Fleck at his press conference, the story of the offseason here, who's going to be the quarterback for the Gophers next season? At his early National Signing Day press conference, Fleck said that the Gophers fully intend to add a quarterback from the transfer portal this offseason. So, who could that be? There are plenty of options already. Top of the line, there's Caden Salter from Liberty, Miller Moss from USC, Connor Wegman from Texas A&M. But those guys are going to generate anywhere from $500K to $1 million NIL packages. I don't think the Gophers have that to offer, and I don't foresee them getting one of those top of the line players. The Gophers would have to compete against teams like Auburn, Louisville, Iowa, some of the top NIL programs in the country, and I don't think they're going to do that, especially when you have a player as talented as Drake Lindsey on the roster. The Gophers said they just want to bring someone in to compete, so that makes me think this isn't the same situation as um, Max Brosmer last year. The Gophers had 0 returning scholarship quarterbacks. Now they have 2. They have Lindsey and Dylan Wicke, who was a transfer from Virginia Tech last offseason. I think Wicke is a formidable backup. I don't. He does not possess the same level of high end potential as Lindsey, but he is another arm in the room. So some guys that I could see the Gophers going after. There's a quarterback from Miami that just entered the transfer portal. I forget his name. I'm clearly not too prepared here, but he's a very talented player that had a similar career trajectory as Brosmer. Reese Poffenbarger began his career at Old Dominion as a preferred walk-on, transferred to Albany, had 2 great years at Albany and at the FCS level, had nearly 6,000 passing yards across 2 seasons, 56 touchdowns. He was a FCS All-American in 2023. That's a caliber of a player I could see the Gophers going after. A veteran guy that has starting experience, not necessarily multi-year starting experience, not necessarily at the Power 4 level, but a guy that can come in, be a veteran, and Lindsey has the opportunity to compete against him. If Lindsey beats him out, it's not like, whoa, it's not a big shock. It's almost a good thing for the Gophers. And then I think that's going to be kind of how they approach this, but they're going to have a lot of offseason to figure that out. Like I mentioned, Flex said the Gophers could add anywhere from 10 to 15 players from the portal, which I found interesting. And we talked about Jordan Newman a little bit earlier, but that's the biggest question mark now is the running back position because back to early National Signing Day, the Gophers did have Shane Marshall verbally committed to the program, who looked like a great 3-star prospect that could have honestly competed as a true freshman, very similar to what we've seen from a Kai Thomas, Bucky Irving, or Darius Taylor. I think he was that good of a level player, so that's a big flip and a big decommitment worth noting. But now looking ahead of next year, the Gophers have Darius Taylor. We all know, surefire starter, fully expect him to be back. And then behind him, a player that I've heard really good things about is Fame Ejaboy, who was a true freshman this year. So next year he'll be a redshirt freshman. He had 2 carries early in the year in the Rhode Island Nevada game. I can't remember which one, but he's a really talented player that I do think could be a 3rd or 4th option this year. But I fully expect the Gophers to take a similar approach and take a couple swings at the position with a veteran. Last year they got Marcus Major that hit and was a ideal backup to Darius Taylor. And they need a guy like that again. And there's no reason they can't get a guy like that again. So they are going to try to, but I would imagine they're going to take a couple swings. Like they had Jaron Magnum from Michigan State, who had a handful of carries, but he wasn't a major contributor. And then you had Cy Bangura, which on paper looked like he might have been the backup, but he ended up falling all the way down to 3rd or 4th role last year. So I think they could take a similar approach. Fame Ejaboy is one guy on the team that I think could emerge as a big contributor next year, but I think we're going to see a new look room by the time August rolls around and we're talking 2025 season. So outside of that on the offense, the wide receiver position is also very interesting because you have Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer who are now leaving off to the NFL. Don't know if both of them will get drafted, but they're going to graduate from the program, and they're out of eligibility. They won't be transferred. So who's going to take their place? Lemecky Brockington's a guy that's now been on the team contributing for a few years, but he's really never been the second or third or first or second option, maybe third option at most in the passing game. And then you have a lot of talented players that really haven't contributed much at the college level. Christian Driver's a guy the team really likes, I think, and really try to get him involved even this year. So he's worth monitoring for a breakout player in 2025. And then two more unknown players that Gophers fans really haven't seen. Tyler Williams, who was a transfer from Georgia last offseason, he's a guy that if they don't find a big name from the portal, they will need him to take a big step forward because he has the traits to be a number one receiver. He has the potential to fill that Daniel Jackson or Elijah Spencer role, but he hasn't done it at the college level. And the fact that he was fourth or fifth on the depth chart this year makes me think that he would have to take a pretty big leap to emerge into that role in 2025. And then Kendrick Lanier is a guy they recruited as a high school prospect that says in a very similar boat. He was a three-star prospect, but a very talented three-star prospect at that. And the team really likes him too. And he could have a big year in 2025, but again, he probably would have to take a big leap to get to that point. Offensive line, I could see the Gophers adding one, maybe two players up front, but they like a lot of these young guys. They like Philip Daniels, who started much of the second half last year. Greg Johnson started every game. Ashton Beers got a few starts. Tony Nelson's a guy they really like. Martez Lewis has gotten starts before. He's an interesting guy to monitor here in the transfer portal because he was benched. Maybe he didn't like that. Maybe he looked somewhere else. Aluma Nkele is a guy they got last year from UTEP who did not play this year. Maybe he takes a step forward and gets into that rotation. Nathan Roy didn't play this year, but he was a four-star recruit in the 2024 cycle. Brett Carroll, a guy they like. Reese Tripp, a guy they like. They have a lot of good young talent there, but they're really young. And that's not something you always want up front. So I could see them adding one, maybe two players there. It would shock me if they didn't add any, based on what PJ Fleck has said, that they want to add as many as 15 players from the portal. But as we look on defense here, I think there's far less questions on the defensive line than the offensive line. Jackson Howard, Anthony Smith, fully expect both of them to be back and not enter the portal, along with Devin Eastern and Jalen Logan Redding. That starting front of four right there is really solid. Lucas Finnessy, make that five. He would be firmly involved into the pass rushing um, outlook in 2025. Zero. If they could add an interior lineman, Martin Owusu, Theo Randall, Riley Sunram, still kind of green there. So they don't have much depth behind those top two. Nate Becker, throw him in there, but um, they could also add one extra defensive end. But top of the line, they're really good. So at that point, it's just adding depth at that position. And then at cornerback, you have a lot of questions. Like I mentioned, Naeem Parrish is a guy I could see seeing the field as a true freshman. Maybe one of the only true freshmen they're adding that I could see that. But Zaquan Bryan, fully expect him to be at least the number two starter next year. He played a lot of games this year, started a couple, and he should have the potential to have a breakout year. But past that, Rylan Kelly doesn't have much experience. Behind that, they literally have no experience. Mike Gerald, Samuel Maydew, Simon Seidel, all very green in their development. So that might be the number one need, honestly, behind backup running back help right now, in my opinion, because you're relying on guys that just have not played too much and you're very young. And cornerback's a position that you just cannot be going into the year with that many question marks, even in the Big Ten. So I fully expect them to do something there. But at the slot corner role, you have Deontay McMillan, who will probably start this year, who really looked solid down the back half of last year. So that's what the cornerbacks are kind of looking like. And then at linebacker, another aspect that you have heading into the team building strategy this offseason is Does Cody Lindenberg return? He did not shut the door on that when asked on KFan earlier. I believe that was before the Wisconsin game. If he comes back, that completely changes the outlook of the Gophers linebacker room. They could really add a player there too. Devin Williamson, Maverick Baranowski, both have started a lot of games. Not the end of the world if you roll into the season with those two, but not much experience past that. Tyler Stolsky, Matt Kingsbury, Joey Gerlach have all played meaningful snaps, but they could really add a high end player there because they're kind of lacking at that aspect. Now, Baranowski would have to take a big step forward if they want a true number one there. Safety position, easily the strength of the football team right now. I'd be pretty surprised if they added anyone there. Coy Parrish, Kerry Brown, Aiden Gooseby, one of the best trios in the country. Darius Green has experience starting. He's another guy to watch when it comes to the transfer portal because he was benched in favor of all three of these guys. So that'll be interesting to watch. Zahir Rainier and Garrison Monroe, two interesting young players as well. So if there's one position they don't need any help at all, it is there because they have the top end, they have the depth, they got it all. And then special teams, the kicker position, they have three options now. David Kemp, a Memphis transfer, Sam Henson, a Concordia St. Paul transfer, and Daniel Jackson, an incoming true freshman from Alexandria, Minnesota. All three of those guys have a chance to be the day one starter. And then at punter, same thing. Mark Crawford's no longer there. Caleb McGrath, talented local kid, along with Lucas Ryerson, two guys to watch there. So overall now, the transfer portal officially will open on December 9th. All this news you're hearing is kind of the period in free agency for pro sports when it's like the tampering period almost, where a lot of people are getting contacted when they shouldn't be, telling what to do when they shouldn't be. That's part of sports now. So there'll be plenty of more news before the portal opens on December 9th. But I think that's when you're going to start seeing players officially commit, officially take visits. That's when it's going to really heat up. And it sounds like the Gophers are going to be really active. Quarterback specifically, maybe they go high end, maybe they go middle of the line. I don't know. They have the option to do either. I think their NIL budget is as good as it's ever been, and it'll be interesting to see how that impacts them this offseason. When it comes to roster building, early national signing day has come and gone, and I think the Gophers are just taking a different approach this year. They didn't want to put a bunch of time and effort into recruiting those high school players. They knew last year's class was so good. They know they have all these good young players. They know they have Coy Parrish. Like I said, their offensive line, they got so many good young players up front that I fully expect to start at some point in their career. The tight end position, they have a lot of, they like Pierce Walsh, Julian Johnson, Jacob Simpson, Sam Peters. A lot of talented young players there as well. And now it's time for their development to show. And they can fill in those gaps through the transfer portal. And it'll be interesting to watch. There's plenty of storylines to follow now as the Gophers head into the offseason. The bowl game will officially be announced on December 9th. And it is important for this Gophers team to get those extra practices in because, like I said, a lot of young players, a lot of question marks. I think by the time January rolls around, we're going to have answers to a lot of those questions of who the questions might still be there, but we're going to know who's going to fill those gaps. So follow along on Gophers on SI, Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel, Twitter channels, X channels, all of our socials, Facebook. Follow along all this offseason for all your Minnesota sports news. Vikings on SI, Twins on SI, Timberwolves on SI. Make sure you subscribe. Helps us out, helps people see the channel. And thank you guys for watching. Until next time.